Well, good afternoon or good evening, whenever you're watching this. Just thought I'd make a short video about some things that have been on my mind. I want to start out with saying that some people teach classes on intuition, as if intuition is the next best thing to sliced bread. And some people knock it, like, can't trust your intuition, it might feel right, but if you just follow your intuition without a plan or rationally examining what you're doing, you're going to get lost. I would like to go over some of my experience with intuition, and I've talked about it before, but I'm going to do it again. From the time that I was very little, I had a very strong intuition that there was something that I was supposed to know, something that I was supposed to understand. That's something I didn't know exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of what is truth. And obviously, what is going to feel like truth or be obvious as truth or become truth for an individual is probably different. What seals the deal for one person might not seal it for another. Now, I'm not implying that truth is relative. I don't believe that. I think truth is absolute, and some people have a closer lock on it than others, and some don't have a clue. So in my case, I didn't know what the truth would be or what it would turn out to be, but I had this intuitive sense that the people around me weren't telling me the truth. They didn't know the truth. They didn't get it. Whatever they were saying or teaching me, Sunday school, church, in school, most of it was like, okay, that's an interpretation. That's how they see it. But for some reason, it just didn't satisfy me. So my point is that I had this intuition to find the truth that would satisfy me. Where that was, what that was, was it in psychology, philosophy, spirituality, mysticism, some different religion? I didn't know, but I was on track to find that. I've mentioned before that I often thought this is a curse because I watched other people having a good time, enjoying life the way it was, and they didn't have this burning question behind everything that was always in the background about what is the truth. So I guess my point here is that I followed this intuition. It was not an intuition that I could ignore. It was a drive. Now, this drive didn't make me want to not have a normal life in many respects, such as getting married, having children, making a living, with all of which I did. So that intuition and that drive wasn't the kind of drive that made me decide, okay, I'm going to give up having a family and doing normal things, and I'm going to take off and travel around the world, or I'm going to go to India and get in an ashram or find a monastery because that's where truth was. I never felt that truth would be something that I would have to go seclude myself somewhere or hide out in a cave to find. I just thought by deeply looking behind the scenes and pursuing the desire that I would find it. I didn't have an assurance of that, but when intuition is really strong, it sort of implies that there must be something at the end of the rainbow. So that was my avocation, you might say. It's like every spare minute that I wasn't working or taking care of business, I was reading everything that I could read that would help me. First of all, I went through all the self-help books and did that for a number of years. Then I read psychology and studied that for a number of years. I got a master's degree in counseling. Then I studied a lot of philosophy. A lot of it was too dry for me, but I found that the philosophers that got into spirituality or what is knowing were somewhat appealing. In my mid-20s, I found books on enlightenment, and just the mention of the word enlightenment and how people that were enlightened were different and how they were able to drop most of their anxieties and worries was very appealing to me. It's as if I knew that there was this deeper, understanding that would impart the peace that passeth understanding, as the Bible says. And obviously I didn't have that peace because I was a seeker. I was on the search. Initially, I didn't know the search would take me into spirituality because I'd had enough of religion as a child. But, eventually it did steer back in that direction. And the term of enlightenment was what really caught my attention, and I started reading everything I could on enlightenment, realization. And a lot of the books were pretty far out, almost verging on the magical. Others seem more rational, but there certainly wasn't a consensus on the interpretation of whatever enlightenment was. But that's where my intuition was leading me, so I kept following that. So, just to wrap the part up about intuition, one of the definitions is a thing that one knows or considers likely from instinctive feeling rather than conscious reasoning. I would definitely say that definition fits the kind of intuitive sense that I had. The second definition is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. That, I think, also applies very correctly to my sense. It's like I've had a strong feeling that at some point, whatever that intuition was pointing to, I would find it and it would be understandable and that my seeking would stop. So somewhere along the line my intuition was vindicated. I seemed to have the perception of someone who understood. Now this was after reading, the great Indian sages, especially the current ones like Nisargadatta Maharaj and Ramesh Balsekar and numerous others. And I just had a very strong sense that, okay, these guys are right. What this state or this non-state, this natural state, whatever you want to call it. I mean, people argue over whether enlightenment is a state or whether it's just getting rid of the false states that you're in and dropping back into the natural perception. But anyhow, my intuition was vindicated long before I really was willing to acknowledge that I had understood something or that I had realized what these sages were pointing to. And it came out in a very funny way, which I was aware of, and it was paradoxical. Because at some point, I would pick up a book and I would read a couple pages, and I would immediately have this very strong sense, okay, yeah, this guy's enlightened. He knows it. He's realized. And I'd pick up another book by someone that was supposedly realized, and within 2 pages I would be like, nah, he's still stuck somewhere in his head, or he's lost somewhere along the path and thinks he's got it, but he doesn't. And I would sort of laugh at myself, because the paradox was, if I wasn't enlightened, if I wasn't realized, how in the hell could I pick up a book and very quickly determine for myself, in a very strong sense, yeah, this guy's enlightened, I'll buy this book, this is worth reading. Or no, he's just full of BS. So that went on for a long time, and I think maybe this proves the point that there's probably realized people out there that don't know they're realized. There's probably people I'm sure there's people that are realized and don't know anything about enlightenment or realization. And they don't talk about it because they just think that's the way things are, or they just think they're different, see things differently, and just accept it and go on. They've never encountered anybody that had the sense that they had, and they probably tried a few times to talk about it and got rejected, so they just dropped it. But anyways, that's a funny paradox, and along with that paradox, I'd like to mention something that Robert Wolff talks about, and he lists a few myths of enlightenment, and he says that the most critical myth is that it couldn't happen to me. And I really agree with Robert Wolff on that, because enlightenment is put up on such a big hill. It's the shining light on the hill. It's the epitome of human evolution. It's the best thing that could ever happen to you. It's very rare. Only a couple people in a million get it. Well, when you're faced with that, even if you've been meditating for 30 years or studying for 30 years or contemplating for 40 years, how are you going to have a strong enough sense of self or enough self-confidence to say, me too, I get it, I'm realized? That doesn't feel very humble. It feels very egocentric, but obviously at some point someone's going to have to say, my seeking's over, I'm realized. Now, I'm also aware that there's a phrase or a meme that says, he who knows doesn't speak, and he who speaks doesn't know. Well, obviously that's BS, because we go to enlightened masters and sages who speak and who share and who try and help us understand. So I think we can do away with that meme. Another problem with saying that you're enlightened is that, from one point of view, there's nobody to get enlightened. And therefore, if you say you're enlightened, obviously you're not, because enlightenment in the end is a shift in identity from the personal self, the limited self, the personal self that identifies as a body with the mind in here. That self has to fall in the background, and when that self falls in the background and you realize you are awareness itself, impersonal awareness, pure consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that's another paradox. I mean, when you realize that you are that, who is it that realizes that? Well, in one sense you can say awareness realizes that, but awareness never needed to realize that, because awareness is self-aware. However, as the appearance of a person in form with limitations, that mind, this limited mind, this in this body, uh, or the understanding or knowledge that is perceived to be with this body in this particular brain, that's what realizes that it is that. And I don't think that's a paradox that you can do away with. So the argument about someone who's realized won't say it because they are the self with a capital S, awareness, pure awareness, not personal, that which is able to know everything that's experienced without being affected. It's just a conundrum, because if no one was willing to say that they're realized, then there would be no teachers, there would be no sages, there would be no books about it, because no one could say. So I just find that paradox something that isn't easily dismissed. And a lot of the talk around enlightenment or realization is that way. It's very paradoxical. At some point, if you get it, you get it, and all these paradoxical things these sages have said over the millennia suddenly make sense, and you go, wow, how is it that I understand this now? I can understand this. I know where he's coming from. So the bottom line for that is that I think when someone realizes that they are the self with a capital S, pure awareness, that does not negate the appearance. It's like the appearance realizes that it's an appearance. It realizes that it's not the doer. It realizes it's not the thinker. It's that personal self is surrendered to the understanding that in essence it is awareness that is creating all these appearances and enjoying the limitation and the experience of being in form. Everything that's entailed with that remains even after someone's realized. I mean, people don't realize they are the self and blow up in a puff of smoke and disappear forever. No, they hang around. Most of them continue to live their life similarly to how they lived before, and they show usually tremendous wisdom and a lot of insight. They usually remain pretty calm no matter what's happening. But the personal self and the personal mind, many habits, attachments are still there. The attachments don't have the same roots that they used to have. And they may laugh inappropriately simply because the drama of a person who thinks that they are this body-mind seems funny to them. But what I'm getting at is that, yes, realization does give you the understanding that you are that. Pure awareness, pure consciousness, impersonal, knowing everything that's experienced but not being affected. And on the other hand, the person remains, the body remains, the mind remains, and that person is the one who was the seeker, who can now say, I am realized. The other thing that I wanted to talk about some is most religions talk about getting close to God or being, excuse me, being good or being saved, and whatever their process is or method for saying or knowing that someone is saved or born again, changed. The implication is that if you are good, if you are saved, if you are a good person, that you go to heaven. And most religions say that if you're not good, you go to something described as hell, which can be simply the absence of being with God or being in a place where conditions aren't very nice. So the point about the various religions is all of them point to an afterlife or immortality. So if you have any value at all in religion, it doesn't matter which religion you espouse. You probably believe that because of your religion, it provides you with eternal life. And I think someone that's realized also knows that you don't have to be of any particular religion or any particular faith to have immortality, because the realization is that the foundation of the universe is this pure awareness, and its creative ability, its ability to project, its ability to create limited forms of various kinds, to have all kinds of experiences, that in essence the realization is that you are that, and that awareness is not something that was created. It's the ultimate subjective position. The I that I use when I refer to this body-mind is exactly the same I that you or anybody else of whatever religion refers to when they say I. I is just the subjective stance, but every being's subjective stance is awareness. I mean, whether it's a worm or an insect, a rat or a lion or a human being, the subjective sense is that awareness of being. So everything is equal in the sense that the subjective I exist experience, whether of a microbe or a bug or a person, is essentially the same. I can recall, Nisargadatta telling people that the awareness in them was the same awareness that was in a donkey. And of course he was trying to shock people, but his point is obvious, that even though the donkey has a very different conscious experience of what life is, for example, a big head, eating grass, 4 legs, etc., the donkey still has an experience, a subjective experience of I exist. A human being, on the other hand, has 2 legs and a very different consciousness, but the same mind, the same universal mind, or the same awareness, that same I am existence, is essentially the same. So the other thing that realization does is it gives you a very strong sense of immortality, because your personal identity is secondary. It's dropped into the background. It's still there. It still functions. But your primary identity, knowing that you are awareness, has the bigger say. And if you are that, and that awareness has always been and always will be, and in essence you are that, the appearance of you in whatever form your beingness is is just an appearance in that. Now, I'm not sure that for all sages or realized people that they would have no fear of death whatsoever. I have a feeling that some of them were at that level. But most people that are realized have a lot more peace. And because their sense of being that rather than being ultimately a person, they're at a lot more peace. So I don't think the drive for realization is an effort to be convinced that you have eternal life or that you're immortal. I think that's the truth. And I wasn't aware of seeking immortality, but I was very aware of seeking truth. And can I say that I was a special person in some way because I had this intuitive sense that put me on the search and that ultimately led me to find that truth and stop seeking? No, because when you realize what you really are, you can't take any personal credit for that. You never were the doer. I was never the doer. I'm just as good as a character in a dream. And the dream character that I am is no different than a dream character I create when I'm dreaming. The only difference is that my dreams are most likely personal to me, and I create the people out of nothing, the scenes and situations out of nothing but my own mind. And I think that's just proof, since we do that every single night, there is no way that we can't say that the reality we live when we are supposedly awake is any different than us being characters in the mind of God. And I don't know, I just think that that's the dream state and the waking state being essentially both dream states, one being the dream state of the person and one being the dream of God or source or awareness, Ishvara, however you want to look at it, that there's really no difference. Regarding reincarnation, I'm not sure it exists, but the possibility seems very likely and seems to be in line with the rest of creation. If you think of creation as evolving, which even if you're an atheist and believe that this is a random mechanical thing that accidentally got started, all the evolutionary biologists talk about how the different species and organisms are all striving towards more and more complexity, more and more improvement and adaptability. So you take a species like us, previously we were something else and we evolved into being a human from more primitive, less capable animals or beings. So along that same line, if that's a reasonable picture for you, that we evolved from more primitive life forms, and most of the other forms that we see in this world also evolved from more primitive forms, then it also stands to reason that persons evolve and become more aware. Say, we like to think that over a lifetime we gain wisdom, we gain kindness, we gain empathy, we gain sympathy. In other words, personalities evolve towards more health and more ability to discern and work with the environment and to be at peace with themselves. So if we're going to say that people evolve personally as well as part of the human race, then it seems to me that reincarnation falls right in line with that progression and improvement. So if there is a subtle body or a soul in this body here, when this body goes, it would stand to reason that if you look at things from an evolutionary perspective, that the subtle body, or that consciousness that is not in form, but informed the form, it leaves the body and maybe goes and takes a rest in a heavenly hotel for a while, and gets nice room and board if they learned something or were good or whatever criteria you want to give. It seems to reason that subtle body, that soul, would be dropped into another body to further the journey, further the wisdom, further the good things and the discernment, that they had in previous lives. So that's what I think about reincarnation, that it's likely. For me, I don't think it's necessary. It's like, if I am that, and as that, I'm eternal, what happens when this body dies is taken care of by that, and I don't have any options about that. So I'm at peace with it. Initially, in my search, I was really attracted to the mystics because of the feeling tone and the descriptions of the mystics, whether they were Sufi mystics or Christian mystics or any religion. But the mystics were the ones that pretty much went deep, and they were like, okay, I have my religion, but I'm not going to just take it as a belief. I want to experience the depths of it. I want to experience the truth of it for myself. In other words, the mystics wanted to know God directly. And when they wrote about their experiences, you could tell that they had found a deep connection with God as they understood it. It was Meister Eckhart, for example, was Catholic, but he was one of the greatest mystics, and he said, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. Well, that's a way of saying I am that. God's eyes are my eyes, and my eyes are God's eyes. So the mystics really touched my heart, and that gave me confidence that my intuition was correct, that there was an understanding, there was a connection that would feel very different from the feeling of separation, that the unity of the individual self with God, that could be felt and known as a foundation for one's living and one's psyche. So I really appreciated the mystics, and they gave me that strong sense of feeling connected with God. It gave me a sense of knowing, of yes, this is right. But over time, the intellect, the ego always questions everything, and is pretty good at questioning everything and saying, well, you may feel that way, they may have felt that way, but I think this, and I'm not convinced. So the search continued, and it was a much more intellectual search. In other words, I had the satisfaction of feeling that connection on an emotional level, but my intellect wanted to understand as well. And that's what led me to seeking out the ancient Upanishads, what the ancient Indian sages wrote, because for me, their examination intellectually, logically, analyzing experience is so profound and so it's so thorough intellectually that if you still have a doubting mind, even after you've had a strong feeling sense of the oneness of everything, studying what the ancient sages taught about the sheaths and projection and superimposition, everything else, it will satisfy your intellect. And I think once your heart's convinced and once your intellect's convinced, the understanding is complete. Your heart and your mind are joined. They're both convinced. And you can just relax because the seeking stopped. And although life will go on the way it did before, the stings and arrows, so to speak, are softened, like they have blunt tips. And although you will be affected, you won't be as affected as deeply by the ups and downs. There will be a strong sense of peace behind everything and a knowing that everything is okay, whether it appears that way or not. I think this is enough for today, so I'm going to call it quits. I hope this has been entertaining at least, and that somebody feels like it provokes some interesting thought at least. And I appreciate you if you viewed this to the end, and we'll take it as a compliment. Thank you very much.